Thank you for joining us this morning on a topic that is close to our hearts, close to the hearts of all the panelists here today, because we've really literally made a living out of doing that. So thank you for joining in, and thank you for your interest in what we have to say. Before we begin, I'd like to ask you a question. Slide's not moving. As you see this image, could you give me a sense of what feeling this evokes for you, what thoughts it might provoke? Fashion, what else? Mm-hmm. 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 Anything else? Anything else? Diva. Mm-hmm. Right, so many questions. I just want to point out you're assuming this is all about things for a woman. This is an assumption. Having said that, I'd like to use this image to introduce the panelists for today and the work that we do. As educators, as art educators coming from various fields, we believe that this image in many ways stands in for the way we are looking at our education systems today. There is infrastructure, there is material, there is objects, there is data, there is curriculum, there is all of that. But what's missing is the person for whom this education system is supposed to be in place, right? So this image stands in for the work that we try and do. I am Adya Kaktikar, Associate Professor at the Shiv Nadar University. I'm a dancer, I'm a dance scholar, and in my work I try and animate this image to locate the person for whom we are creating the curriculum and the spaces and the infrastructure and everything else. I'd like to allow my panelists to introduce themselves.
Thank you so much. I'm Manjima Chatterjee, and I'm currently serving as the Vice Principal of Shiv Nadar School, Noida. I also look after the arts program across all the campuses of Shiv Nadar schools. I'm a playwright. I'm something of an arts trainer. I work with teachers and children across the country. So, and this over to Bhargavi.
Thank you, Manjima. So, I am Bhargavi Gopalan. I am a Bharatanatyam dancer, I am a dance scientist and an educator. In Chennai, I run a small business that focuses on teaching dance to adults and older adults, combining the artistic abilities of Bharatanatyam with the health abilities of what dance can offer. Apart from that, I'm also a dance education consultant for Nalanda Way organization, and we work towards creating arts integrated programs for Delhi government schools and low-income aided schools. Thank you.
Can you hold your questions? I haven't even got started. Can we go back to the PPT, please? All right, so the role and purpose of education in our society has historically been an issue of much debate, and currently there is a fair amount of argument about what should be taught and what shouldn't be taught in schools. This debate seems more urgent today because we are at a moment where there is an unprecedented level of change in society, technologically, philosophically, socially, economically. So education is two things. I'm sorry. Education is two things, and I'm sure you'll agree with that. One part of education is about developing your naturally occurring gifts, things that you were born with, in a way that you become a productive member of society. The other role of education, which opposes this in some ways, is to inculcate certain desirable habits, ways of being, skills that you may not have, but are necessary for being in society. So in some ways, these two ways of education are sort of, they pull each other apart, right? more than ever, education, this idea of thinking about what should we teach, is causing stress. Are we teaching the right thing? Are we doing enough? Is this even relevant? These are questions that we are increasingly as educators asking ourselves. So the first problem, and I believe that the question that emerges, that the reason why this problem happens is that we assume that everything that we encounter in the classroom, whether it's the curriculum, whether it's the material, whether it's the experience, or the cultural values that we project in the classroom, are stable and static. Most pedagogical approaches focus on giving students skills that worked in the past, rather than acquainting students with the idea of change. And change is something that this generation has seen more than anything else. I am a pre-internet, pre-mobile generation, most of us are here. So instead of giving them skills necessary to navigate change, most pedagogical approaches are about inculcating skills that come from the past. The second problem that that education has is that when we ask the question, what is worth teaching in a K-12 school? Do you mind? Yeah. The educational frameworks that we operate within are a curious colonial legacy that we have inherited. The K-12 school system within which we operate is one of the most visible remaining legacies of colonization within this country. So then, in keeping with this Enlightenment ideal within which this education system was set up, everything that is indigenous, local, and traditional is out of the school curriculum. The system then operates from a worldview of empirical scientific thought, and in this understanding, all that is experiential, emotional, unreplicable, unmeasurable, is seen as unreliable and often not worth teaching, therefore. The third issue with the contemporary educational framework is that the gap of experience. All education finally is a matter of experience, right? Subject matters in textbooks and the classroom format that we teach in is imagined that is replicating experiences of the real world. That's where finally our students will operate, right? It is hoped that the knowledge that the students acquire in school will equip them with tools and skills to participate and navigate real world scenarios and solve real world problems. Otherwise, what's the whole point of coming to school, right? Like my daughter often reminds me. Several studies have, however, shown that this gap between what we do in school and the real life experiences is only increasing. The more we think about it, the more it's increasing. I mean, I remember my father telling me, or even my grandmother telling me, that this is not a gap that they experienced. So what are we doing that is sort of increasing this gap? Several studies, and I'm not going to quote the scholars here, have also shown that the centralization and homogenization of curriculum, limiting curriculum to textbooks, the pitfalls of standardized testing system that only allows knowledge to be expressed through writing in a test within a limited time under pressure on a certain day, has forced several children and several kinds of competencies out of the workforce. In his book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, if you haven't seen it, I would really recommend this. The historian Yuval Noah Harari argues that the human beings know the world through stories. And it is in the making of these stories that we have moved civilization forward, because we've remade the stories that we tell ourselves. The crisis of the contemporary post-truth moment is that we have no way of knowing what stories will resonate in the future. All the beliefs, truths, worldviews that generations have held on to are becoming redundant at an unprecedented rate. I'm sure we all see this. If you remember your own childhood and the children you see today, it's not the same belief systems, it's not the same worldview. Education systems gearing up for challenge of the 21st century and beyond have to acknowledge that they need to teach their students to be willing to experiment and be wrong. In a typical school system, we teach, being wrong is blasphemy, right? Of course you can't be wrong. You wouldn't succeed. Human beings are, however, wired to take risk, right? Cavemen survived because of this instinct. According to John Shear, a professor of paleoanthropology at Stony Brook University, one of the crucial reasons that the Homo sapien survives is that the Homo sapien brain, our brain, combines complex planning developed in the front of the brain with language and the ability to spread ideas from the back of the brain. Alone amongst our primate tribes, there were 9 species of Homo sapiens, human beings that once walked the earth. There were 9, and only the Homo sapiens survived. It's because of its ability to cope with constant change and turn change to our advantage by adapting to it in creative ways. So simply put, we are intelligent. That's why we managed to be here. So as educators, in the business of training this intelligence, of directing it in ways that serve the society at large, it is not enough to ask how we can become more intelligent. What can we do so that students coming out of our class are more intelligent? But it's important to ask, how are we intelligent? Some of you may be familiar with this idea of multiple intelligences, but if I was to move away from this idea of multiple intelligences and ask, how are we intelligent? Then if we look at the way we live the world and navigate the world, we'll realize that intelligence is diverse. We think in many ways. We think verbally, we think through material, we think in spaces, we think in sound, we think in movement. Intelligence is also dynamic, which means what was intelligent yesterday is no longer intelligent today. It is also distinctive, as in people have their own ways of arriving at a solution, and there is no necessarily one right solution for a problem. So we need to be clear, really, that we need to redefine our education system so as to prevent the disappearance of this fundamental human trait, this ability to take risk, to adapt, to be flexible, that made us dominate the world today. Right? If we are not to do this, what do we do? So the problem of Indian education, you can keep discussing endlessly, and you can keep saying, oh, this has to change, that has to change. But in reality, it's a system that is so big. According to a British Council report in 2019, it is one of the most complex education systems in the world, with over 1.5 million schools, over 8.7 million primary and secondary teachers, and more than 260 million enrollments every year. This does not account for the village schools or the tuition centers. This data does not take that into account. So if you were to overhaul a system that is so big, you can't just throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? You just can't. You may want to, but you can't. So the arts, coming back to what can the arts do then? The arts, when located within this framework of whatever we have inherited, right? This is what we have inherited, this is what we have. When you embed the arts within this framework, the arts animate and enliven existing educational materials and frameworks to create possibilities of creative engagement. Inserted within the pedagogic framework as a process of learning, definitely not as an extracurricular activity, definitely not as a cultural product to showcase to parents on your annual day functions, definitely not as a respite from the tediousness of the main subjects of maths and science. The arts have a specific role to play in the K-12 system. The arts traffic in possibilities, what is possible, and they teach students to make qualitative judgments, right? So unlike much of the curriculum which has right answers and wrong answers and correct words to use, the arts, there is no right answer, right? It's qualitative. It emphasizes that every problem can have more than one solution. And then, of course, they open students up to multiple perspectives and cultural diversities in the classroom. What a typical classroom does, a typical standardized written curriculum that we are required to teach does, erases the multiplicity of cultures that you have and perspectives that you have in your classroom. The arts make that possible and make students realize that the person sitting next to you is potentially very different from who you are, and to respect that difference. Moving beyond the mind and body divide, this assumption, like if it was up to me, we probably would not be sitting in chairs, right? This assumption that you can only make sense of things when you still your body, shut it down. Okay, now only focus. So for example, I'm a dancer by training. I don't sit on a chair, I use a ball to sit, because if I sit on a chair, I can't think. If I don't move, I can't think. So this assumption that this mind and body is divided, this separation, the arts bridge this separation, which is created by the school system in general. Engaging the whole person of the student in the material, poetic, and emotional aspect of the curriculum, that whatever curriculum that you might be teaching. So positioning the arts in education is an encounter between the teacher and the taught, between experience and novelty, between organization and improvisation. So while all of this, we say, oh, arts are brilliant and all of that, but does it really make sense to have this in the classroom? So if you look at 21st century skills that are put out by the University of Arizona's Institute for Future Studies, you will see that much of the skills that are listed that we speak about are the skills that are going to be needed for success in the 21st century and beyond. And so while all these ideas seem exciting in their abstraction, and I saw a number of heads being nodded, yeah, we should really do it, right? But the question really remains, we know why we should do it, but how can we do it, right? How do we do this really? So to address this question, I'd like to invite the next panelist, Manjima, to give us a sense of how these abstract ideas can actually be put to practice within the curriculum.
Thank you so much. So yeah, the how. I think the why is something that we are all pretty much on board with. The how is the big question. Of course, the NEP does that. NEP kind of reaches out, gives us some designs, tells us, okay, bring the arts into the classroom. And also says, do not make arts the basis of assessment. Make sure you're assessing from an academic perspective, right? That's the one big leap of faith that, the NEP takes. But then the question is, how do you do that? We talked about something which is probably not measurable, which is qualitative. How can we put something out there that enables students to demonstrate their learning, but at the same time, not be assessed based on the quality of that demonstration? So it's a bit of a conundrum. So I would suggest to you that what we are looking at here is understanding that art is not just about what you can demonstrate, first up. Arts enables students to engage with learning in a very different way. So one of the things that Adya mentioned just now, she was talking about how we expect everyone to sit on chairs, and I mean, how many of us, I'm sure most of us have taught at some point of time, how many of us have never had a classroom with at least 5 kids fidgeting, looking out of the window and reminding them to come back? Yes, why does that happen? It happens because the body is simply not a part of the learning process. And the arts actually seeks to subvert that. If you go back to traditional learning systems across the world, not just in India, you'll see that learning has always happened in multiple spaces in multiple ways. The storyteller's function of seating people down together and engaging in a story was always about people coming back to them and saying, you have a traditional storyteller, they ask you to engage. They don't expect you to just sit there and receive, right? So we are looking at cognitive development, we are looking at social development, we're looking at emotional development, we're also looking at cultural quotient. We're also looking at technical quotient. These are requirements in the 21st century. how can we make sure that these things happen? So I'm going to present to you 3 examples, and in these 3 examples we'll see how we look at arts as curriculum, how we look at an arts integrated curriculum, and then how do we look at an arts enhanced curriculum. And the fundamental differences between those 3 we'll explore as we go. So the first example we'll see is an example of arts as curriculum. It's a very simple thing. They're exploring a social science-led project. And the social science-led project is looking at the Delhi Sultanate. It's looking at the period between the 11th and the 14th centuries, 15th centuries, and it's looking at architecture as a way of understanding what the learning, the knowledge systems of that time were about. We are looking at maths because we are studying angles. Why are we studying angles? Because please remember, this is a gumbad. This is the structure that is typically called like a gumbad up north. It's a dome. You have windows that are structured at particular angles. You have mirrors placed strategically, which help to disperse light, so that this entirely covered space, which is entirely covered because it's so hot. So it's entirely covered, it's all stone, but there are windows that are louvered and light enters at certain angles. There are mirrors that are placed inside which disperse the light, so the interior is well lit. Additionally, the dome serves a particular purpose. It helps with ventilation. It helps with increasing the space that you are in from within, whereas from the outside it's the same amount of space. So it changes the perception of the space you live in. You don't feel like you are in a completely closed space. You feel as though this is well aired, well lit. So the person on the inside doesn't suffer from being inside such a closed space. How do we understand, or what do we understand about science, maths? Anyone? Science, maths, social science? Do we see the angles? Yes? Would you like to talk about some things? Yeah. Absolutely, you can look at congruency of triangles and how they actually work in real life. Symmetry is there.
Space is there, area, volume.
Absolutely, we also understand the flow of wind. We are understanding how light reflects. Optics, absolutely. This is a grade 7 project. Yes. Absolutely, and how does it serve the purposes? The materials, the colors, everything. Yeah, absolutely. And at a very basic level, this is a sculptural model. So you have, these are the sculpture teacher and the maths teacher and the science teacher are standing together. And the sculpture teacher was teaching the children how to create a sculptural model. So there was a very clear arts agenda. There is a very clear physics agenda, there is a very clear maths agenda, and all 3 are fulfilled. And the child goes away with an understanding that they will never lose, because that child has not just read about optics, has not just read about wind flows, has not just read about how being in a particular space must feel, but they have understood it. They've understood it by doing. So this is one example of arts as curriculum. And just to give you an understanding of how long this took, this actually took, this making of the whole structure took 3 days. 3 days and a total of 6 hours, which included the academic lesson being conducted while this model was being made. So the learning, the theory of it and the practicality of it was happening side by side. And this is a very important aspect, because while we are assessing the academics of it, unless the arts learning is happening side by side, there's no excitement. Unless the child is getting to actually create things on their own, there's no excitement. And without that excitement, I don't know if it works. Yes.
So I would like to share my experience with this regard. Before the pandemic, one section of my grade 7, actually we have done this project. For at least one and a half month, we were away from the academics, the regular math academics. They visited the clock tower in the Secunderabad area. They measured it. They got the measurements, and then they, with the ratio proportion knowledge, they have created miniature structure of that, and it is still lying there in my school. And the grade 10 students did the similar thing with Taramati Baradri. They went there, they measured the structure, the height, of course, they took the measure, they assumed it, and then they measured, and then with the use of ratio proportion knowledge again, they could measure the height also, and then they made lot of calculations, lots of bookwork, I can say, and then they actually created an 8x8 Taramati Baradri structure in my school, and it's still lying there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you. We'll get to more sharings. I'm sure we'll have a lot of scope for that. But I just wanted to say that for us, and I'm sure for you too, this answered one very big question that children, particularly as they go from middle school to senior school, frequently ask, which is, why maths? So, you see why maths. You really learn to understand and engage.
I forgot to tell you, one of the students who was very mild in math was the first one to come up with those calculations accurate when we started this project.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'll play a quick video for you. This is the second aspect where we look at arts integrated learning. And this is the slightly different version. And I just want you to, I don't know how well the video will play, but if you can, I mean, whatever we can do of it. Are you able to hear?
भीतर से मैं ज्वाला जैसी ऊपर से हूँ शीतल जल दीना 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 दीना.
Thank you. So, मैं हूँ मिट्टी. I am earth. I'm below your feet. And deep below, I'm like fire. But when you see me on the surface, I can sometimes be as cool as water, right? That's arts integrated learning. Fundamental difference here, we have the children, what they did was, just to give you a background to the learning, the process, what happened is that they had something that they had done in their EVS class, and then they came to the dance class, and the dance teacher asked them to express what they knew. They talked about it. Then she asked them to express what they knew without their textbooks. So then they talked about how they experienced the earth. They talked about how they felt about it, what they had known, what they had visited, what they had seen. And they tried to bring together the knowledge acquired from the textbook, from the knowledge that they already had, and then they put it together into a poem which they composed. They then expressed that poem through dance. So that was how this particular process worked. This is a slightly longer process, but takes place only in the dance class. So that's arts integrated learning, where arts steps in to support, synthesize, and help you to better process the knowledge that you already have. Now, when we talk about arts enhanced curriculum, this is a particular example of a project that we undertook in grade 9, and we've been doing it for a few years. This video will give you a little picture of how we did it in the first year. It's grown since then, and I'll talk about it. But the important thing for you to think about here is that when we talk about arts enhanced learning, we're talking about how arts can take learning to a higher level. And because this is grade 9, which we all understand is very serious, because whenever children grow up, they become very serious. We stop them from having fun in the classroom. So this is a very important thing to think about. Will you play the video, please? We'll just play it for a minute or two, and I'd like you to just listen to what the children are saying. Yeah.
The village of Palampur is a fictional village that our teachers created for us to make us understand economics better. This village is 150 kilometers from Delhi, and we had to inculcate all angles in the making of our village. This included who lived in the village, how it looks, and what happens in the village.
So the first thing we did was we created a physical representation of our village, and believe me, our way too much enthusiasm resulted in the formation of pretty crazy ideas. I mean, we knew that we had to put in fields and huts, but then instead we put in airports and shopping complexes and gaming arcades. But then, with the help of our teachers, they taught us how a typical village is and what it consists of.
In the next phase of the journey, we thought of dividing the people of Palampur into various categories, which were the authoritative figures, semi-authoritative figures, moneylenders, dependents, and service providers.
So once the village was established, we became characters in its daily life, okay? We were peacefully going about with our lives when a government order came in. It said that a highway was about to be built right through the village of Palampur, demolishing the most of it.
At the end of the journey, after putting together our village, being the villagers ourselves and battling the government, we learned a lot about decision making, village economy, and life itself. The village of Palampur is all about a village.
So this is a basic economics lesson. And if you can come back to the slides, please. What we're looking at here is we're looking at understanding choice, we're understanding marginality, we're understanding poverty, we're understanding village economy. Those are the requirements of the grade 9 economics syllabus. And those are the things that we have to fulfill. So that was the first year when we ran this. After that, we realized that there's actually a lot more to be done. And the pandemic gave us a fabulous opportunity. So what we did was, in the pandemic, we took it a notch higher. And we decided to see how we could actually take the understanding built on felt perspectives. Because you know what happens after this is once the highway comes and seeks to destroy the village, suddenly the villagers come together and they start talking about things that nobody in the class has considered till now. So you have kids coming and telling us, if the school breaks down, how are my children going to get educated? Somebody comes and says, no, I can't give you this part of my field, because if I give you this part of my field and my field gets split in two, then this thing will suffer, my produce will suffer. So we are talking about things that the kids from airplanes and warehouses, which they were talking about initially, because these are kids who are super urban kids who have no idea of how a village economy works, from there to that space. And it comes because the research is done at the level of every child, because they are playing that role. They know they have to come prepared. They can't look foolish in front of their friends. So they read up. The reading that the teacher was struggling to make them do on an everyday basis happens organically. And they don't just read what is in their textbook. They go and do additional research. They go to the People's Archive of Rural India. They go to the economic data of the country. They go and look up government papers and policies. And they do this on their own volition. And this is what emerges. Can you bring this way, please? Yeah. So last year, what we did was we took this. If you can just scroll down a bit, Anuradha. And what happened is that the children then started coming up with research papers. They started coming up with understanding, firstly, these principles that we worked on, which is the no free lunch principle, the cost-benefit principle, marginalities. And a lot of these things came out in the form of writing that, we showed it to a few people from the university and they said, this is college level work. This is grade 9. And let me tell you, the impetus was given by us, nothing else. It was just drama. And this is not drama being performed by professionals. This is drama being done by teachers. How do we bring in drama into this space? We bring in drama by finding a story, one, which makes sense to the kids, which they can enter into, which they can inhabit. And then bringing in a point of conflict which is real, which they can take on as a challenge. Because the one thing that somehow regular education forms don't seem to do is to provide challenge. For children, challenge is not just about, solving the most difficult sum. It's often about understanding that real life problems exist and I have the ability to solve them. So the one thing that drama does best and above all is to really build the confidence of that child. Because a child who has stepped in to solve a problem and saved their village from being demolished is a hero. And they're not going to stop being a hero just because they flunked the maths paper. Yes? So thank you so much. Can we return to the slides? So those were some 3 examples. And like ma'am here shared, I'm sure every one of us has small examples. But the things that I want you to think about, coming away from the approach, is we look at developing curiosity. Without curiosity, there is no learning. We look at the Goldilocks principle of the right level of challenge, because without challenge, engagement will not happen. You will never be able to bring out the best in the child. And with the combination of these things, what are the skills that we are developing that are real world, competency-based skills? So coming back to what we started talking about, when we say competency-based education, what do we mean? And how can the arts, and these are just 3 examples, but how can the arts actually contribute towards building these competency-based skills? With that, I'm going to hand you over to somebody who's an actual practitioner, and as a dance scientist has really brought some of these skills up to work in the real world. So over to Bhargavi.
Thank you, Manjima. So, all right, so that brings us to a very important question of how does the participation in the arts prepare us for a professional career? So before we actually get into it, I'm going to tell you a short story about my own journey, because I think that answers and summarizes this question very beautifully. So the 3 pictures that are shown here are pretty much define my work. As I said in my intro, I was a Bharatanatyam dancer. I had been dancing from very, very young age. So dance was very much a part and parcel of my life. Every day after school, I went to a dance class. So as much as going to a school was important, going to a dance class was also important. I was fairly good with technology. I took a lot of keen interest in developing certain skills and enhancing the skills that I had when it came to using technological tools when I was in school. And the third thing was I have an undying love for physics. So all 3 of these constantly kept running in my mind. And when it came to actually choosing a career or what do I want to do with my life, I couldn't think of an option that eliminated one of this. I couldn't just do dance and not do physics. I couldn't just do physics and not do dance. And I really wanted all of this to be somehow combined in technology. Now, that was a lot to ask when I was 18, because this was very confusing as a space. But being in a liberal arts university that allows you to experience arts in a manner that is beyond its performative abilities actually develops the skills that you need to form connections between these so-called really vast and different subjects. So we often think of science as a separate bubble. We think of dance as a separate bubble. But being in an arts integrated space allows you to make these connections, allows you to see what is the overlap between these subjects and what do the possibilities of these overlap open up. So going through the process and a lot of extensive Google research, I came to know that there is an MSc program in dance, and that is one of the, was very, very enlightening for me, because I usually came across only MA and MFA programs, which did not again interest me because I was so interested in physics. So I ended up studying an MSc program, and that is called as the Dance Science program. So that takes us to the question, how does participation in the arts prepare us for a professional career? I believe there are 4 broad areas that it helps you with, and I would say these are not limited to it, but 4 broad areas. And I will go over each of these areas one by one, but first is to enable the existing fields to meet and create new opportunities. Develop an understanding of basics of art other than their direct professional outcomes. Expand or enhance 21st century skills. And lastly, making thinking visible. So if we go to the first one, which says enable existing fields to meet and create new opportunities. So this is what I was talking about. So dance science is a fairly new area of study. It's existing about, say, 30 or 40 years. So a lot of dancers like me wanted to do science, I suppose. So they all decided that, we need to understand the science, the body, the dancing body a lot more than we know today, because injuries were very common with dancers, very, very common. A lot of us, when we were in class, would often get a sprain and keep dancing along with it. So a lot of dance enthusiasts and science enthusiasts met together and talked a lot, I suppose, so, and dance science happened. And with the onset of dance science as a subject happening, it opened up a lot of different opportunities. One is to work as a dance scientist, like I was saying. You could be an independent researcher, or you could be someone in higher education at a university, actively practicing and putting out research and also teaching for that matter. The second is a community dance practitioner, which is what I'm more actively working currently, is to actually use the things that the health outcomes of dance to cater to different populations. For example, dance for Parkinson's. So a lot of the people who have Parkinson's diseases struggle with some basic things such as balance, memory, cognition, and dance has been very important tool to restore this ability in the capacity that as their disease progresses, and also offer them a space of community, right? The third is a movement analyst. This is a subject that also overlaps with sports science. We see a lot about sports science on the television these days. Is to actually look at the dance and say, is their movement efficient enough? And if you have to figure out the efficiency of the movement, then you need to know the velocity that the dancer is in. You need to know the torque and the angles that the body is making, which means you need to know physics. And combining the knowledge of physics with dance gives rises to being a movement analyst. There are now several softwares that have been built upon it, so therefore the technology sides of it also comes through. And the last is a dance movement therapist. Again, this is a very popular choice of study these days, where you use the concepts in dance and in movement for therapeutic purposes. Again, these therapeutic purposes may be directed towards a certain kind of a population or for the larger front of health. Then dance science knew and did a lot of research and then came across a lot of problems that dancers were facing, and these needed diagnostic tools. This also needed rehabilitative tools. So then the dance science world said, okay, we need to talk to the medicine world, because it seems that the medicine world has a lot more resources and also the right kind of people who understand this kind of scientific things. So I suppose then a lot of people who were doctors started working with actual dancers, because they had been dancers sometime in their own life, and gave birth to a new area of study that is called as the dance medicine or performing arts medicine. This is a fairly new area of study. Now universities are offering it as an MSc program for people who have medical training. In the US, you can also study it as a specialization for doctors. There is a Harkness Institute for Dance Injuries, where a lot of physiotherapists, orthopedic surgeons study the dance medicine specialization to work with specific populations in dance. So within dance, somebody is interested in working with ballet dancers, somebody is interested in working with Bharatanatyam dancers, and they do use their own experiences of this dance to bring it to the table. If you were to be a dance medicine professional, it wouldn't be possible without you understanding what dance is. So you would have had some experience of the movement itself. Okay, so the second one is develop an understanding of basics of art other than their direct professional outcomes. I have a lot of images on this slide. Can someone call out what kind of professions this look like? Anyone? A fashion designer? A writer, architect, filmmaker, costume designer, sound designer, a jewelry designer. And what do you think all of these professions have in common? A creative bent. So all of these professions, be it a writer, a social media strategist, that's a very important job as well, has to have a creative bent. Now this creative bent comes from, again, engaging the arts in a manner that allows for artistic thinking. Artistic thinking is not a display of your artistry, is not how well I can sing or how well I can dance, but it is about using the ideas and bringing these ideas into fruition, developing the idea, finding the midways and connections, and then reflecting whether these ideas work or not, and set yourself in the artistic process. So when you engage in the arts in school or at higher education level, it is this artistic thinking is that you are enhancing, which are crucial to many of these creative industry jobs. Creative industry as an industry is a very fast growing space. We have now more than ever newer jobs coming up. Also the changing climate of the professional space. So we need to be adaptive. we need to be on our feet, and we need to be able to use this artistic process to create deliverable skills. All right, so this is a list of 21st century skills that are required for the changing job market. And on the other side are the 10 lessons that arts teaches by Elliot Esner. I'm going to just give you a moment to look at some of the skills that are listed in both areas. And for example, critical thinking, creativity, and there is problem solving on the other end. And what it basically does, goes to our third point, is to expand or enhance these 21st century skills. So for example, I work a lot with older adults. So in my class, I have a group that is 65 and 80 at the same time. So I need to be able to have a very strong communicative skill. But I also need to know what to say and what cannot be said, and how do I say things that I cannot say. When you're working with such a wider population, you have to be very, very creative thinker, because a lot can happen on the screen. And this, I'm also teaching online, so I'm also working actively with technology with this older group. So my problem-solving skills need to be on point. I need to be able to think and act on my feet before the class ends. I need to be able to take initiative so that my students are able to come to class and feel part of the community, and offer them multiple perspectives so that it doesn't look like the class is very biased. At the same time, give them a space for collaboration. When I collaborate with them, they collaborate back with me. So that's the skill that I need to have first. And create a space of thinking through the body, but ultimately this is a dance class. But we are about setting a community. We are using the dance for a specific purpose. All right, so last slide, it brings us to the idea of making thinking visible. What is this making thinking visible? So if you are in a class, you often say, oh, this child is very, very bright, or that child is very, very bright, and they'll come through this, and they'll be very good at what they do, etc., etc. But I believe that all the child are very bright, provided they have a learning style or a space that allows their thinking to be visible. And arts allows that space for the thinking to be visible by allowing these multiple perspectives to come through, and within the same class offer different learning styles, right? So when you are in one of the projects that Manjuma had just shown us, the kids were talking about making a dome. So they were reflecting on how they are making sense of their things. So this is a dome that exists, so you can see there are a lot of monuments in Delhi, so you can go see a Humayun's tomb, or you can see a Qutub Minar. You can make sense of the things that you are already present. Be very close observers. What is the last time you actually went to the Qutub Minar, stood there and saw what it was for what it is? We usually go to and see a monument, we're like, okay, this is nice, take a photo and then move back. But it allows us to be very close observers, right? Then organize these ideas. So I have now got a paper, I have got a pen, I've got some tools. How do I make it into a dome? How do I cut the paper in a certain way that I get a dome? Or how do I cut the paper in a certain way that my monument is not going to collapse on itself? What kind of paper should I use? What is the material that is best used for this? Reason carefully. So you got to reason, like ma'am was talking about the ratio proportion. So if I am going to make a structure, I need to know the ratios, otherwise the structure might not look like what I'm intended to do. I can't have one piece that is small and one piece that is gigantic. So I got to reason carefully. And then I got to be flexible enough to transfer into any context. This is what arts teaches us. So when I was in a dance science program, there are many things that I learned as part and parcel of the class that allows me to be flexible to use it in any context. So today I'm able to teach dance to a 25-year-old. I'm able to teach dance to a 65-year-old. I'm also able to teach and extend that class to an 80-year-old, and allows me this flexibility that can extend it to any context. The class for a 25-year-old looks very different than an 80-year-old, and the purpose of each class is different. But it is again structured on the same basis that arts can be for health or dance can be for health. All right, so that brings us and me to the end of the presentations. Any questions?
So before I invite any questions, and there'll have to be quick questions, I just want to sum up what we wanted to say here. couple of things. One, that the arts make learning possible with joy and investment. Investment, not just of your cognition, of your so-called brain, but like what Gandhiji said, a collection of your heart, your mind, and your hands. So if we can create an educational system where we find students coming to class every day, invested in what they have to learn, not because they're going to get grades, not because they're going to pass 10th and 12th and get a job and da-da-da, but because they think that everything that we do in the classroom matters to their lives. Thank you. Any questions, please, quickly? The feedback form needs to be given, I have been told. So yes, please.
There is one piece of sharing and one question. Okay. So sharing is, as ma'am was saying, she has done, so similar projects I think all CBSE students are doing or all schools are doing. Recently we had this Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. So as part of that we had this Independence Day celebration. So we took India as the theme, and so we divided classes with like some with culture, some with math. So we did with one class with math. So math in architecture, math in sports, and everything. I mean, from ancient to modern and everything. I teach class 10 math. So they have trigonometry, right? So trigonometry is very difficult for them to understand how we apply unless they go in higher classes. And then there is a subject, a topic of similarity. So we usually merge it. So what I do is I take them to a ground where there is a flag post or a tree at a particular time where there is a shadow. Put another stick or a scale, 30 centimeters, which height they know. They put shadows. The tips of the shadows are aligned. Now I ask them, how do you measure the height of the pole or the tree? Because you don't have that much long a measure tape, or you can't, So then we use the concept of similar triangle and trigonometry. We merge it. They know this, so they can use the ratios, basic proportionality theorem to find it. Now I extend. Now do you think, how do you know the height of Mount Everest, right? So they say, yeah, 8,400 something meters. So how do you know that? So how did they calculate it? Now we connect it to GPS system, satellites, and so on. This is how we connect everything. So that's how we do in our school, and I guess most of the schools do. So that was my one sharing. And one question was, ma'am, you're talking about different learning styles, right? So we just attended a session few days back where they said, actually different learning styles don't work. So we constantly get this different perspectives, and you are an expert in your field, some other is expert in their own field. They keep on giving us this opposite things. So how do we deal with that, So
thank you for that. Just to share that, it'll be difficult to answer that exactly without, I wouldn't want to be unfair to the other person because I don't know the exact context in which whatever was said. But just to say that one single method, like a chalk and talk method, can also be very effective, right? The question that lies before us is, what happens to the student when they leave the room, when they leave the classroom? They step out of the classroom, and then what happens to what they acquired in the class, right? So for instance, in your example about measuring the flag post, I would say, could you think about extending it in a way, for instance, and this again is something that we've looked at, maybe the children construct something, not just in terms of, they didn't just observe and came back, but they actually went out and they made something that remained in the school space. Maybe something that serves a purpose, like a gardener's shed. Maybe just a flagpole with a straw thatching that, some of the people who work around the school, they can sit down and have a nimbu pani. What the arts does is, it brings purpose to learning. And when we say that we're looking at differentiation and different styles of learning, all of it, finally, is tied together with purpose. Of course, arts is not the only way you bring purpose, right? You can bring it about another ways also. But for us, one of the things that we have seen is that there is a certain richness to an experience that is created by the arts, which a student never forgets. And that is what makes an impact in their lives. We are not just here to teach, really, I mean, I'm going to be the devil's advocate here and just ask you, what purpose does it serve to a child to know what cos theta or sin theta means? At the end of the day, that child sitting in the class is asking, why do I have to learn this? So somewhere, that sense of understanding that I can contribute to my life, to the lives of others, that I can be worthy, this can bring some value. Are we looking at how education makes people more human? Are we looking at how we can be better people by way of our learning? And not just acquire certain skills, which may or may not serve us in the future. So I think that's I'm sorry, it's a slightly long-winded way of answering, but I hope it answers your question. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Kriti from DPS RN Extension. While ma'am was mentioning about the point that the gap between the subject learning and the real experiences or professional world, the gap is increasing day by day. But also we are going towards that very deliberately when we think about how technology is using us and we are not using technology. So I would love any speaker's perspective on how art can be the way and the means to bridge this gap, and how we can manage using technology and technology not using us. So what's your perspective on that? Thank you.
I'm just going to quickly speak and then maybe come to Bhargavi. I think one of the things is that we have to think about what is technology. Writing is a technology. A pen is a technology. I mean, it's in the way we think about technology. If we think of technology as a tool, then writing, printing, they're all technologies. So it's just that we have become it's become such a part of our lives that does not seem like alien. And your digital technology begins to feel alien. The multiverse seems alien, right? It's a tool. The first axe was technology. Everything, the wheel is technology. Is there a way that we can live without it? I don't think so. So what the arts do in that sense is to sort of allow this critical thinking space, to create the space where you can think about things differently than what you are tuned to do. And then to imagine ways, and this is one also to respond to what was said earlier, that one of the things that arts do is not necessarily provide a solution, but teach us to ask questions. Can I frame my own problem? Like as an artist, as an independent artist, that's what I have to do. Can I frame my own problem? So one of the things that students in the university say, my class is very difficult and I'm a very bad grader. Why? Because I never give them a question. So for all their assignments, they have to create their own question and answer it. Right? So we are so in that sense, technology, if you rephrase what technology looks like, then it's not alien. You're sitting on technology, we are wearing technology, it's material finally. Yeah. Yeah, it's what you do with it. There's a question at the back. Give me a minute.
I just wanted to add two things from the two people who spoke, because I'm a math teacher myself. So, when we spoke about learning styles, because art is just not painting, it's just not craft. Art engulfs all forms of art. So, drama is art, expressing is art, everything is in the form of art. Not every child will be a kinesthetic learner who would like to create things by hand. So a learner who is good at oration, that also can be an integration of art. I'm a musician myself and a mathematician, so I know the integration of the two, and it does help a lot. My daughter she hates math, but when it comes to integrating with music, she's a musician as well, so she knows how, math can be integrated with music and it becomes beautiful. So there are so many ways in which, and when technology was questioned, now art has taken over the field of technology in a big way, because we're talking about digital art, we're talking about graphic designing, web designing. This cannot work without technology. So, and it has given that one edge to art. So I think it is a boon in that way. So both the questions, I guess it's answered why art is everywhere and prevailing everywhere, and it just engulfs all the subject areas. Thank you.
Yes, because we're actually past time.
Already here for the next session, but I'll take your question outside. Is that all right? This gentleman has been putting his hand up for a while now. Yes.
My question is to Bhargavi ma'am. This was the first time I heard the concept of dance scientist. I think much was, I got the basic understanding of it in your, the way when you explained it. But I want to know where this MSc in dance is offered, which university, and I also want to know, you also cited some examples where dance therapy can be implemented and all that. I just want to know where these therapies are available.
Okay.